What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be diving into mono white soldiers, my budget version of the deck that I put together yesterday on stream. Overall, this deck performs fairly well, and depending on who you ask, some people think the mono white version of soldiers is better, and some people still think the Azorius version of soldiers is better. And I do think it's personal preference, as I do think both have their upside, though some people think the white version's faster. But I decided to go ahead and just make mono white on top of the Azorius one I already did. So in today's video, we'll be kind of going over my mono white soldiers. So overall, the deck is fairly low curve. You know, it's nothing too crazy. I know this deck is slightly a little bit more expensive than I normally would do, as we have 4 copies of Valiant Veteran and also 2 copies of Merrill. I do think both of these cards together is what kind of helps this deck work, especially in budget form, as you're still building up the collection to get the other cards that you would also include for your soldier deck. But in doing so, we do have some pretty unique pieces I do think work in that time to figure out what you need to craft and what you need to make, or what you have in your collection to add to the deck. But in the 1-drop slot, we have Yodian Frontliner, just a solid 1-drop. That's a 1/1 for 1. Whenever it attacks another target creature we control, gets +1/+1 to end a turn, so it definitely makes good. As you get the board wider, this kind of pumps up that one creature, maybe that one additional, to get through maybe a bigger blocker. Another card up in the deck is Lay Down the Arms, and this is, I think, why the mono white version to some people is a little bit better, because this card's actually like really good for being an uncommon. You get to exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control, though its controller does gain 3 life. This is kind of like a solid 1-drop removal spell for a lot of things that exist in the meta. I mean, Shieldred is kind of like a key card that this kind of gets rid of for only 1 mana, which is definitely pretty sweet. The downside is it is sorcery speed, but I still think it's an overall very, very good card to have in the deck, especially like when you are on the budget side. After that, we got Recruitment Officer, another solid 1-drop that I think just fits well in most decks that play any sort of white that are on the aggro side, because of its pay 4 mana kind of ability. Has kind of a built-in, let me look at the top 4 cards of our library. As the game kind of progresses maybe past the early turns of the game, and helps you get more cards into your hand that you can possibly play on following turns. And it's just a 1 mana 2/1, which makes it very solid, and it's a soldier, so it fits the archetype. Then after that, we have Spectrum Sentinel, 4 copies of it in this deck. It is a 1 mana 1/2 protection from multicolor, which is definitely pretty decent, as there are a few multicolor decks in the meta as well. And the upside of this card is that whenever our opponent plays a non-basic land on the battlefield, we gain 1 life. So if we have multiples of these out, we're getting little bits of life here and there, and that can always be very good depending on the deck matchup that you are playing. We can gain the life maybe to counteract maybe some life loss that we lost the previous turn, making this an overall pretty decent card for only 1 mana. In the 2-drop slot, we have Cathar Commando, a 2 mana 3/1 flasher that for 1 mana we can sacrifice to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Another thing that's great about this card is that it flashes, so we can do it at the end of our opponent's turn. So we maybe flash this in for 2, and then we're able to immediately attack in with it on our turn. Definitely good in both ends. It has utility that it gets rid of target artifacts and enchantments that may be pesky, as well as it can be a pretty aggressive blocker with it being a 3/1 power. After that, we have Resolute Reinforcements, another solid card that I feel like people have seen in the meta before because of some Dominaria, but just a solid 2 mana 1/1 that has flash, that when it enters battlefield, we get a 1/1 soldier token as well. So this just helps us create a board presence, which I do think helps us overall overwhelm our opponent and get very wide very, very quickly. Another card that I added to the deck over another card that I will talk about in my sideboard is Valiant Veteran. This is just one of those cards, because our deck is so low, a lot of our creatures are smaller. We get one of these out, and maybe we have 3 or 4 other creatures on the battlefield, and just makes our team feel that much bigger. And I do think this is a lot better of a card, because it's almost like an instantaneous effect. And then has the upside of, if we have 5 mana, we can exile it from our graveyard and put +1/+1 counters on each soldier we control. So in both ways, this card is very versatile and definitely helps out what we're trying to do. And it only being 2 mana was definitely, to me, why I think it's slightly better than the Azorius uncommon lord that exists. But still, nonetheless, an overall very solid card that helps work well with soldiers. In the 3-drop slot, we have Gavany Dawnguard. Now, I think this is a card that probably people didn't really kind of forgot about, because it's from all the way back in Innistrad. But this is a solid card, 3 mana 3/3 with Ward of 1, making it a little bit more of a challenge to get rid of. But whenever it's day or night, it starts a day-night cycle. Whenever it becomes night or becomes day, we have to look top 4 cards of our library. We may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them, put it into our hand, and put the rest on the bottom of our library in any random order. This card's great. It's definitely one of those things that if your opponent doesn't play spells, or you decide not to play spells, this card helps you dig. It gets maybe maybe an answer, maybe finds your Valiant Veteran, maybe finds one of your one-drops, Cathar Commando. Depending on what the situation is, it finds a lot of cards in the deck. I know there are cards that are greater than this, but this is just another way that this card kind of helps us dig deeper into our deck. And for 3 mana to get a 3/3 is still pretty decent, and I do like the idea that it has Ward 1, making it a little bit more of a challenge for your opponent to get rid of. Then in the 4-drop slot, another card that I felt just kind of helped this deck overperform, especially in budget form, was Meryl, and I do think 2 copies is a pretty decent starting point for this card. But the idea here is essentially Meryl's just static ability is during our turn, our opponents can't cast spells, activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So essentially it turns your opponent from doing anything against you. So the minute you drop this, your opponent loses any control of doing anything on our turn, and they can only do their spells on their turn unless they get rid of Meryl. And the upside of Meryl is that whenever it attacks, we get to create X 1/1 soldier creatures on the battlefield, or X is the number of soldiers we control. So Meryl's kind of that card that, 1, it helps us, stable the board so our opponent can't react to our stuff, and 2, it creates an enormous board presence. Depending on when it comes out, if you play a pretty solid curve like a 1-2-3 curve, or maybe you go 1-1-2-2, you have multiple creatures out when this comes out, and the minute it attacks, all of a sudden we have 4 or 5 additional soldiers on the battlefield. You drop like a thing like a Valiant Veteran, and essentially that seals the deal. And if your opponent can't get rid of your board at that point, you can almost swing in for lethal. And it's overall just a very solid card, and I do think it's kind of one of those cards that helps make soldiers perform fairly well when it's still limited on what cards you have access to. And then the last card we have in the deck is Argavian Fanlex. It's a card from Dominaria as well. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature we control, and it's a 6 mana 4/4 Vigilance. But the deck is fairly low curve. We can get a lot of creatures out fairly quickly, and there are points where we only pay 2 mana, 1 mana, 3 mana for this card, making it a pretty decent attacker / blocker. Get a Valiant Veteran out, and all of a sudden this thing's a pretty decent attacker and blocker, maybe being a 5/5 or greater. But still, nonetheless, this deck is great. I had very good success with it. I think I had over 50% win rate on stream. I will probably post some gameplay of the deck if you guys want to stick around and watch that. And then I'll probably talk about after the gameplay what ways you can go about upgrading, what cards to look for, maybe the priority maybe you want to look at when it comes to upgrading the deck overall. But with that being said, let's just dive into some gameplay, and then I'll catch you afterwards. Yeah, this is a good hand. Got removal. We have a 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. Just need 1 additional land, and we're off to the races. I mean, it's also possible we top deck a 1-drop. So, I see you also are a person of culture with those sleeves. Nice. Also mono white. Are they blue white or are they just mono? They're blue white. I don't think you lead off on that, personally. Because all I can do that. Okay, I see you. It's definitely an interesting card, to say the least. In the trenches, it's definitely a very high upside card. All right, we're just pumping squad. Meryl. Gotta do something about Meryl. Alright, not what I needed. And we'll take a look. Awesome. Sure. Yeah, I mean, the Anthem effect is good. They attack. Even though they know I have Meryl. Huh. I guess we just flash this in. And we'll just chump block with the token. Do I sacrifice it, or do I wait and see where my openings are? That is the question. Comes a 4/5. That's not good. I say we don't do anything and we sit and we get double triggers. And then this puts pressure on them to do something. Sure. They don't have a lot of creatures. They can't enlist here. There's no way you can enlist in this ability if you know I'm going to double spell 2 veterans off the top. All right. Okay. That's a card. Yeah, might as well just go for lethal and get a bunch of tokens to replace. That is a big attack. It's a lot of damage. Not killing Meryl. Are you gonna discard? We'll get rid of one of those. My creatures live. And you're down to 2. All right. Yeah, I have a bunch of them, and I have 10 1/1s in the process here at 2 opponent. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. I mean, we got the right cards there, I think, which helped. Like, this is still a good... This is great hand as well. I think mono white was the choice, being budget. And going with the Valiant Veterans over the other card was a better follow-up. I'd probably playing this right into a burn spell. They're stick, so like, see, I feel burn. It's like you just sometimes know when it takes this long just to go from one phase to another. And then this is where I probably instead do something at the end of their next turn. Sure. Don't respect the 1/1. I see how it is. All right, the 1/1 was too much. It was definitely very scary. Like, I don't even think there's a lot of humans in that. All right, this is a good hand. More diversified on our 1-drops. We'll play our 2/1 recruitment officer. All right. We'll swing for 2. Swing for 2. What do they got then? Their stick. I don't know what the stick is. I think we resolute at the end of turn. See what they're doing. Mono green stuff. All right. Well, resolute. We'll play this. And we'll play this. And we pass turn, because I'm not attacking into a 2-2. No? Creature. Creature. No tax. If we just draw a land, I mean, I'm good. Just a land. Sure. Or not. They have vigilance, so I will hit face. You can kill one of my creatures, opponent. Or not. Yeah, this is a good attack. Sure. We'll spread the wealth around. Yep. Coming through. Okay, we killing a creature here in the process too on the way out. Doesn't matter. Sure. I think you're still dead. Yeah. Yep. Slowly clicking cards. Sure. Maybe not the best hand because open veteran turn 2 is not the greatest, but it could work. You gotta consider. Just Delver. It was a tough choice, I know. Delver is definitely a very hard card to deal with. I don't think you instant consider there. I think you leave mana open, so to be ready for a counter spell. Like, I got a free 2/2. It's definitely a bit strange, I would say. I will agree. I mean, unless I have like a Fate and Hope here, like, don't feel like playing Haughty Jin yet, I guess is what they're considering there. Gotta make this appear. You know Mono Blue's not playing any flash creatures unless... What play is that, opponent? I had 2 open mana. Like, you don't... I don't know. Sure. Mono Blue with Surge Engine is definitely good. I prefer that over whatever they're doing now. Also, bouncing the Recruitment Officer instead of the Valiant Veteran, which costs 1 additional mana, which then leaves me maybe susceptible to make this appear. Definitely weird on my end. If they had an Essence Scatter, you bounce the Veteran, it pumps my creature. You don't bounce the card that gets pumped by the creature. But I guess they think that there's too much value in the Officer over the Veteran. Sure. I'll trade. I guess. It just doesn't seem like the right line. Welcome to the queue. Yeah. I don't know. They don't attack here whatsoever. You never attack here if you're the blue player. All right, second Jin is something. Or you attack there. I guess we're racing. Pain and Hope. Can't target it with anything. It's a 4/4 with Ward 1. The queue is what it is, I guess. You're going to bounce back the fan links. All right, we're trading? Sure. Sure. Sure, opponent. This turn, we get to look at top 4 and maybe grab a soldier. All right. Activate. I typically don't. Because I like to do it at the end of their turn. I understand how the turns work. Opponent, you're on a clock. You're on the clock, opponent. You're gonna counter my 1/1. I will pay. They have another counter spell. I will pay again. Got one more? One more Essence Scatter off the top? Sure. I'll just play my 2/3. And it's lethal next turn, unless they can play another creature on the battlefield. Actually, I think it's lethal no matter what they do, even if they play another creature. Because of frontliner in the graveyard. Just for safe measure. Might as well get wide. They could bounce something. Yeah, I mean, that is true. Add in just one. We'll just move it there. Spread the wealth. Are we bouncing? Sure. You're still taking 5. No matter how you block here, you're still taking 5. I mean, that is fair. It's an annoying deck to play against. It's a fun deck to play as, though, because you're in control. When you're in control, it's much more fun to play. And we are back. So the deck, like I said, overall performed fairly well. There are unique things about the deck, even in budget form, that makes it very overwhelming to an opponent. You know, it is one of those things that some people are also like scoop very quickly to soldiers, just the minute they see it. If you're on the play, you definitely have the advantage, just because you can be more aggressive when it comes to casting things out on the battlefield and make your opponent have to react to what you're doing. So areas I would look to probably upgrade in, you know, when it comes to things to look out for, like Guardian of Benelli is another great card with the idea of the Enlist. The Scry 2 kind of helps us dig a little bit deeper, fix the top cards of our library. The fact that we can give it indestructible makes it also very good. Another card in the deck is Thalia. This taxes your opponent's spells, or in our spells, I guess, non-creature spells, I should say. But it's definitely one of those things when you get into more of those mid-range / control decks. This definitely shuts them down, making things more expensive on their end to really react to what we're doing. And because we don't play a lot of spells outside of lay down the arms, it's not that big of a deal, I think, for that 1-mana tax that we have there. Brutal Cathar is a solid, you know, soldier that you can add to the deck. Sure, the werewolf side's not a soldier, but the the front side of it is a great card in the fact that does the day-night cycle, and we get to put things underneath it and kind of eliminate them from the battlefield, making it harder for your opponent to deal with what we got going on. Siege Veteran is the card I kind of swapped out for Valiant Veteran. I think Valiant Veteran is the overall better like starting point when it comes to soldiers, and Siege Veteran is like that better additive that you add into the deck as you build it. But this is kind of like the soldier slash, I guess, aggro version of Lunarch Aspirant, which was a card from the previous standard. At the beginning of our combat during our turn, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature control, meaning any of our creatures can get that one much bigger. And then after that, another target soldier you control dies. We get to create a one colorless soldier in its place. So definitely a card that helps us kind of keep things, going. Even if things die, we can get things to replace them. Additional copies of Meryl. I probably only go up to 3. It's kind of where I would probably stop when it comes to Meryl, just because it is legendary. You can only have 1 out on the battlefield. So it is one of those things that 3 is probably the maximum I would do, just because it is a good card, but you can't play more than 1 at a time. Then the last card, I would say, if you don't have these already, I'd probably suggest crafting one of every monocolor legendary land, just because these are cards that you'll probably play in any deck that plays, said cards, and Aganjo is a solid, add one of into the deck just to kind of have a way to, deal with something in a channel way, and it can't be countered. So you discard Aganjo for 3 mana. It deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. And if we have one of our legendary creatures out, which is Meryl, it actually costs 2, so it's a little bit cheaper. The upside is why you don't play more than 1 is because it's a legendary land. Most of the time, you don't want 2 of these out on the battlefield because you can only keep 1 out. And then it kind of gets clunky if you don't really have good targets for it, for its channel ability, if you decide if your opponent doesn't really have too much going on that way. And the other thing I didn't add into it was the Mishra's Workshop. It's another solid card to add into a monocolor deck just because, we're not really tight on non-basic. So that's another card I would probably add, maybe 2 copies of. So let me add that to the sideboard just before I forget. So we'll just add a couple, you would add a couple copies of like Mishra's Factory into Mishra's Factory Workshop Foundry. It's one of them. This is probably one we'd probably add a couple copies of. So when it comes to, we'll start with the lands just because it's the easiest to probably explain. I'd probably cut down to 21 planes. I would add 1 Aganjo into that, and then I would add 2 Mishra's Factories to get us at 24. 2 is probably a good number. After that, I'd probably add in 1 additional Meryl. We'll cut down on Phylax. I'd probably start, make sure you're at, 4 and 3 is probably where I'd start. And then I'd probably look at other things to add after that. The next card I would say is probably the next best card. It's probably going to be like Brutal Cathar, right? It doesn't hurt to have more things that remove things. And I do think, as much as Gavony Dawnguard's a great card, I do think adding it in some Brutal Cathars is great. So what I'd probably do here is I'd probably first take out the Phylaxes before I remove the Dawnguards, just because the Dawnguard will dig a little bit deeper. So let's just go back and find Brutal Cathar because I by mistake clicked it and removed it. So we'll add, some Brutal Cathars into the deck just because it's additional removal, and additional removal is always good. So we'll add 3 copies of this. We'll cut down to 2 of those. So you're probably here at 4 and 2. After this, now we got to look at our 2 drops and what we want to add to kind of, figure out there. After Brutal Cathar, maybe we actually add the Siege Veteran just because it then makes all our creatures that much better. So we add the Siege Veteran. We'll start cutting out the Gavony Dawnguards because we don't want, cluster ourselves up too much in the 3-drop slot. So we have 2 of these. Then after that, I'd probably cut down on Spectrum Sentinel. I know they're not 1-to-1 when it comes to cost, but, as you kind of want to get more into like the 2 and 3-drop slot, you have to cut down somewhere. And I do think, cutting these down, because as much as they're good, they're kind of limited in what they do. In that sense, you're not always going to go against multicolored, creatures. You're not always going to have opponents that play non-basics. So having 2 of them is probably a good place. And then we just take the 2 spots we picked up and add in 4 Siege Veterans. The next card out of these 2, I actually think Guardian Nubenalia is probably the better of the 2. I think Thalia is just kind of like the added benefit. So we add in 4 copies of Guardian Nubenalia. We'll cut down on Cathar Commandos, just because that's a card that, it's good to have, but we don't need it in the main deck. It's just kind of a nice filler to have in the 2-drop slot. And probably from here, I'd probably even cut down an additional copy of Spectrum Sentinel, maybe a one-off. And then from here, after that, I'd probably put in maybe like 3 copies of Thalia, because yet again, it is legendary. You can't have more than 1 out on the battlefield at any given time. And I'd probably just, start cutting down on these, and maybe cut down Maybe we'll cut down to 2 Thalias. I think that's actually a nice sweet spot. And this is kind of what it would look like when you fully upgrade it. I'll have links to both of these down in the description below if you just want to import and kind of see where your missing pieces are. But like I said, I'd probably start off if you're looking to figure out what you want to add in. Get your 3 copies of Meryl, start there. Then from there, I would get Brutal Cathars if you don't already own them, just because it's another nice removal card to have built into a creature. After that, it'd probably be your copy of Siege Veteran. Then after that, we'll go Guardian of Benalia. And then after that would be Thalia, is kind of how I prioritize it. I know this doesn't order it in the right way because it does by casting costs, but that is kind of where I would go. And then when it comes to lands, Wanaganjo, I think it's just good to have in the collection in general, regardless of whether or not you're just playing soldiers or if you play any of the other mono white decks. It's just a great card to have. Same thing with Mistress Foundry. A couple copies is probably good. You don't need a whole playset, just because, you know, it's clunky to have more than maybe a couple because it only produces colorless mana, but it's great in the sense that it's at least a land that can still attack in as, you know, a creature, which is definitely very good. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Soldiers deck. I think it's a great deck to play. It's a fun deck to play. It does a lot of things. It interacts very well with a lot of cards that exist in the meta. It's just definitely a fun time. If you just wanted a little bit of a change from, you know, the typical mono white, this is definitely a good, you know, shift on where to go to play like a mono white tribal style deck. With that being said, if you like this video, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the deck. I know from when I played it on stream, people really like the Soldiers deck, but I don't know if this is going to be one of those things that you're going to see in the meta and be like, oh, Soldiers again. But let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, hit the like button. Definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, you want to post new videos like this one here on the channel, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.